How's it going, everybody? Jacob here at We the Fandom, and today we're talking about the Greek god Zeus. As you can see in this picture, we have Russell Crowe, who's going to be portraying Zeus in the new Marvel film Thor: Love and Thunder. Now, as you can see, this portrayal of Zeus is like a fat, jolly buffoon type character, and basically my idea is that this is how millennials and Gen Z see the Greek god Zeus. I think it says a lot about the connection between people and pop culture and how having characters and storylines reflect the modern era and, trying to represent more modern people is actually a bad thing when it comes to a lot of entertainment. And that's mostly due to the fact that a lot of modern writers can't help but create self-insert characters. They can't help but project their own attitudes and ideas on characters, even when they don't fit. And I think even older writers, producers, directors, and stuff like Taika Waititi, who's working on this Thor film and also worked on Thor Ragnarok, the third Thor film, they're really trying to key into the modern zeitgeist. They're trying to key into that millennial Gen Z kind of humor and how the idea of how they see themselves. Now, this is a tweet I saw a few days ago. You have Geralt of Snyderverse saying Snyderverse Zeus versus MCU Zeus. They legit made him a joke with the crying emoji. So you have, I don't remember the guy's name, but you have the guy who does kind of look like Gerard Butler, who played Zeus in the Zack Snyder Justice League, which I thought was a much more badass portrayal, and I wish we could have seen more of him, especially in either the Wonder Woman movie or probably a third Wonder Woman, or maybe they make a movie about the Greek gods. But obviously, in comparison to the MCU Zeus, there's a very large chasm between the portrayals of these two characters. One of them literally looks like a god, and the other one just looks like fat Russell Crowe. And, the tweet above the original is this guy saying, Zeus is the bumbling drunk dad of Greek mythology, not Gerard Butler. And I think that's his view, I think, is more of, it's a representative view of our generation, of how we're the generation that kind of is, it'd be old fashioned to say we're just lazy, that we're not as tough and all that kind of stuff. But I think there is some truth to that kind of old fashioned view on the modern generation, is that we don't really try to live up to higher standards, and we kind of almost revel in the fact that we have such low standards for ourselves and that we don't try to be something better. And so I think this guy commenting on the original tweet is basically kind of projecting his own self-view onto Zeus, the Greek god of, the all-father of the Olympians. That's the kind of saying this, the Zeus is the bumbling drunk dad. Well, yeah, when you have Russell Crowe, who didn't bother to get in any kind of good shape to play a Greek god in a superhero movie, which is somewhat funny because, when even today people will mention, when they talk about people being in good shape, they'll say, oh, that person looks like a Greek god. And then here's Russell Crowe getting to play a Greek god, possibly the Greek god in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and he's incredibly out of shape. And I think this is a much wider problem that you see, especially in comic books, but in a lot of entertainment in general, where it's like a lot of modern attitude is put on to not just modern stories, but into reboots or new interpretations of older stories. They're always trying to twist an older story or, reimagine it for the modern audience. And they're always putting these kind of modern, kind of weird attitudes and personalities on characters, even when it doesn't make sense for those to have been there. It's like the modern World War II games like Call of Duty and Battlefield, putting more women and people of color in the games to get good representation, even though it's not accurate towards actual history. Like in that case, you're not whitewashing history, but you're doing whatever the opposite of that is, or a different variation of that. You're literally trying to change the past in order to match your modern sensibilities. And I think that's making, in terms of comic books and comic book entertainment, I think it's making maybe not heroes in general, but the modern interpretation of heroes and the new heroes that are created in current year, I think they just don't live up to the standards that heroes used to. They're not as heroic. And I don't just mean that there's more anti-heroes than normal. It's more that heroes don't try to be as good. You know, they kind of give in to that modern nihilistic attitude that there's no such thing as good and evil. There's just people who have good and evil, which is true, but they don't recognize that the difference between being good and evil is that, yes, we have good and evil in all of us, but making the choice to be good or to be evil in any given situation or in spite of the situation is what makes you a good or bad person, and it's what makes you a hero or a villain. Now, I will say that, you know, ever since both Marvel and DC have been making stories about real mythological gods in their comics, probably since the 40s, I'd say, they definitely taken their liberties with these characters and their interpretations of them. But I would say for the most part, you know, the mythology and the physical portrayal of the characters typically spot on. Now, obviously, Thor in Norse mythology, he's not a clean-shaven, blonde Fabio type character like we see in Marvel Comics and in the MCU. He's actually more kind of, you know, he's redheaded, he's got a beard, and in some variations of the stories, he's even said to be, you know, a little rough looking or possibly even ugly. So yeah, Marvel and DC both take their liberties a little bit in the design of the characters, but I'd say personality and, you know, the mythology behind them are typically still there. But in a lot of the modern entertainment, you know, movie and TV versions of not just gods, but much, you know, old heroes and old stories and fables from the past, they're just not as relevant in today's world. And that's because the writers and directors, they don't know how to not project their own, you know, self-worth onto these characters and onto these stories that have been told for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so you get a, you know, a fat, out of shape, kind of silly looking Zeus in the MCU instead of the Gerard Butler looking guy who is in the Zack Snyder Justice League. If anything, I would say if you wanted to do a more comic book accurate interpretation, even if it's not, you know, mythology accurate, Liam Neeson from the Clash of the Titans and the whatever the sequel to that movie was, I don't know why I'm blanking on that, but Liam Neeson actually looks like the Marvel Comics version of Zeus, basically wearing like shiny armor. I don't think he was like really buff or anything under the armor, but you know, the hair, just his general look was more comic book accurate than Russell Crowe is now. And, you know, we have yet to see how Zeus will actually be portrayed in the movie. All we've seen is this trailer when he, you know, uses some type of power to basically evaporate the clothes off of Thor. But it being a Thor movie and it being a movie about the character Gore going around killing gods, I'm guessing Zeus isn't going to have that large of a part in the whole movie. And, you know, going back to what I said about the Marvel and DC interpretation of these characters, even in the MCU so far, other gods haven't really gotten their due, I'd say. I mean, Thor is incredibly underpowered compared to the comic book version. Odin is criminally underused in the MCU, and unfortunately he's already dead, so I doubt they're going to bring him back. But he's appeared in 3 movies so far. And if you only knew Odin from those 3 movies, you'd think he's just kind of like an angry old man who wears golden armor, who walks around Asgard, gets angry at people, especially Loki and Thor, and he occasionally shoots laser beams out of his spear. And that's about it. But this guy is like, even the Norse mythology version of Odin is far more powerful, or at least shown to be more powerful. I mean, in the MCU, the only real magic he's ever done, or any type of like cosmic abilities, was when he took Mjolnir away from Thor and sent him to Earth, and possibly opening the Bifrost a couple times. But other than that, Odin doesn't do much, and maybe not so much in the Marvel Comics version, but in real Norse mythology, but in Marvel Comics, he basically, you know, it's said that he created the universe. I mean, Odin is incredibly powerful. He could destroy Thor with little to no effort. He could destroy the Incredible Hulk with little to no effort. He could raise the entire Earth. He's fought Galactus, the cosmic being who eats worlds. I mean, this guy is insanely powerful, and we haven't really gotten any of that in the MCU. In terms of Zeus, he's about the same power level as Odin. You know, he and Odin are both Skyfathers. They're both the the heads of their respective pantheons. And, Zeus has completely obliterated the Hulk in a battle before. He's defeated a number of enemies over his time at Marvel Comics. In terms of like larger cosmic abilities, he's the same power level as Odin, so he could have the power to like, at least they say he could, make or unmake the universe. It's a little bit different than, like I said, they take their liberties in terms of the actual myths, and they kind of build them up to be more like superheroes, which I'd also say is somewhat of a problem in the modern interpretations of godlike characters, is that ever since, I'd say, they started appearing in comic books, we see gods almost more as superheroes rather than mythological figures. And what I mean by that is there's a difference between, MCU Thor and actual Norse mythology Thor. Those characters, when they were created hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, they were powerful, but they were powerful in simpler and more primordial ways. Like, when you think of heroes, people back then, when they thought of Odin and Thor or Zeus, Hercules, all those gods, I don't think they really could have conceived of a character like Superman, who could shoot laser beams, who could run faster than a speeding bullet, couldn't jump over a skyscraper. If they couldn't have conceived of a character like the Hulk, who could just grow stronger as he grew angrier. At best, they likely would have thought of like an ogre or a troll who is maybe slightly larger than a man and, could probably pick up a large boulder, but couldn't lift a mountain or punch out a god like the Hulk could. And yes, they had characters like the Cyclops and the Titans. But even if you go and read those myths, these characters, when you read like how they fought each other and the way their powers were described, again, they didn't see things the way we see things today. There was no spider sense, there was no healing factor, gamma powers, or any of that kind of stuff. There was the gods and the titans and these other mythological creatures. When they fought each other, or when they fought humans or just destroyed things on the earth, they were described as being more like forces of nature. Like when Zeus and Hades battled in the heavens and their might was so great that they shook the earth. And, I'm paraphrasing that wasn't an actual story, but you get what I'm saying. Like, they were described as more as forces of nature rather than saying Superman and Doomsday just punched each other out, completely annihilating Metropolis, and they could shoot laser beams out of their eyes and fly into the sky and all that kind of stuff. The gods weren't described in that way when they were conceived. And so the way that they're interpreted today in movies and comic books and TV shows, they're definitely modernized, at least in that sense, which I don't mind so much because, again, I look at them as the comic book version of Odin and Zeus, not the true mythological version. And I think both have, the pros and cons in terms of their stories. But in terms of the modern entertainment interpretation, at least for Marvel, I think DC has done okay with them so far. Ares is kind of maybe a little bit more, well, I'd say a lot more powered up than probably the mythological Ares. He's got his like cool costume with the armor and all that. So again, these were comic book interpretations created by, World War II vets who wanted to write stories of gods with like Shakespearean language, even though that's not how the gods would have spoken. You go read 1960s Thor and he speaks like in Old English, even though he was a Norse god. So yeah, the comics definitely take their liberties, and yet I still think that the modern interpretation in movies is kind of a joke. I mean, it's a little pretentious to say it's disrespectful, but I'd say it's disrespectful of not just the myths, but like the comic book versions of these characters that were adapted for those stories. Because I'm not saying Gerard Butler or this actor who looks like Gerard Butler, I'm not saying Zeus would exactly look like that, but he definitely wouldn't look like a fat, Santa Claus looking Zeus. And I think, this is probably the only Zeus we're going to get for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And just like the Odin we got, it's probably the only Odin we're going to get for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and he's probably not coming back, which I think is a shame. I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they really toned down the abilities of most of the characters, but I think it's not just incredibly lame, but it's also a bit confusing when they tone down the powers of characters that are literal gods. So yeah, let me know what you guys thought about this in the comments section below. Do you think DC or Marvel does a better job of portraying gods in their movies? Or do you think neither one does, and that comic books should go back to a more traditional version of the, Earth's deities? If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also hit that notification bell so you never miss out on a new video. I'll see you all next time. Bye.